to give us reason to think that adelphos might be translated otherwise, then you do, right? So it's the exception to the rule, but there's the rule. You've got just a couple of chapters later in the same gospel in Mark, when Jesus is being crucified, and it said, there at the foot of the cross is Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary, the mother of Joseph and Judas and Simon. And so you have another Mary that's named, who's present, who knows Jesus because they're family, which makes these guys his cousins, right? So thus the doctrine of perpetual virginity of Mary isn't really like up for grabs here just because it says brothers. It's a different translation of the word adelphos, usually uses brothers. Here, because of its context, clearly means cousins, right? Mary, the other Mary being some relative of Mary and her children who are also followers of Jesus. Does that make sense? So we get that out of the way, right? In case anybody's sitting there thinking the whole time about what are these brothers of Jesus doing here? Now we can get on to what's really kind of at stake for us and what's important for our lives here in the gospel today. Another important line here that I want to kind of hone in on. This should catch us by surprise a little bit, I think. So he was not able to perform any mighty deed there, apart from curing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. It says that Jesus was not able to perform mighty works for these people. Well, that doesn't sound like Jesus, does it? Kind of, I don't know, at first glance, it kind of throws me sideways a little bit. What is it about the all-powerful God that's not able? That doesn't make sense, right? In Spanish, to be able to is the verb poder. And poder is also, it means can, right? To be able to, right? Yo puedo is I can, right? So the ability and having power, the ability to do something and the power to do something are synonymous throughout other languages, including our own, but in Spanish it's a little bit more obvious. So Jesus doesn't have the ability to do this. What in the world is going on here? It's not that Jesus doesn't have the capacity. It's not that he doesn't love them enough to heal them, right? Because Jesus' power comes from his love. He is love incarnate. But rather, it has to do with the conditions that he's in. It's the people that he wants to minister to, these people that are from his own hometown. He goes back to Nazareth. In the first reading, we hear from Ezekiel about Ezekiel being called to be a prophet to people who will be rebellious, who will be stubborn, who will be hard of hearing when it comes to the word of truth that comes to them through the prophet. And we see the same thing happen with Jesus. He comes back to his own native place, and Jesus makes a point of saying in his own country, that is in his own, not the nation of Israel so much as where he's from, his hometown, right? Even in his own house. That they don't want to believe him because they know him. They don't want to believe that he could be the Messiah because they watched him grow up. Because in their minds, they were so set on the idea that the Messiah had to come from somewhere far away. They wouldn't know where he came from. He would be a very unknown kind of figure to them. But Jesus comes from in their midst. They know his family. They were around when he was born. They watched him grow up as a kid. His dad's just a tecton. We say carpenter, but it really just means builder. Likely some kind of stonemason. And Jesus following his father's trade. So they're kind of off-put by it, the idea that, wait, you think you're going to be some kind of prophet or miracle worker or a Messiah? You're from Nazareth, dude, and you put stuff together with rocks. And so for them, they've limited what the Messiah can be. And so when the actual Messiah shows up in front of them and surprises them and doesn't fit into their little boxes, they don't know what to do with that. And so they reject him. This is why Jesus can't perform mighty works for them, is because they won't believe. It's because they don't have faith. When we don't have faith in Jesus, when we don't put our trust in him, we don't make a choice to say, I surrender to you, then we strip him of his power to be able to do anything for us. Jesus isn't one to come and impose himself on us and say, sit down, I'm going to do something good for you. Just hold still. It's not how that works. Right? It happens in a relationship. It happens when we give him permission. Right? One of the titles that we give Jesus is a spiritual physician, right? A healer. Right? When you go to the doctor, right, typically he's not going to do some kind of, really invasive operation without your consent, right? Why not? Well, because that would be, what would you call that? Abusive, if nothing else, right? Manipulative could be another thing. Those things aren't loving. And since God is perfect love, he cannot impose himself upon us. He won't. And so unless we consent to him, unless we say, Lord, I put my trust in you, I put my faith in you, then he's not going to do mighty works for us. He's not going to bother wasting his time preaching to people who don't want to listen to him. And so we have a large part in being able to welcome God's blessing into our lives. What does that look like? Well, let's take as a bad example those who rejected him in his hometown. The Messiah has to fit in this box. I've got this narrow category that God is supposed to play by these certain rules. And if he doesn't, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. Right? We can have limiting factors on God because of the things that we believe about him. This is why the study of theology is actually important. This is why when people come and they say, oh, well, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, and we love Jesus, we believe totally different things about him, but it doesn't matter. It's all the same. Well, that's a little bit true in that there's union amongst Christians and that, yes, we love Jesus, but it's also important for us to hash out some of what some people would consider minutia, because these things that are statements about the truth of who God is and what he does, those are important. They have very real consequences on our lives and our relationships with him and on the world that we live in. Okay, so that being said, what are the places in our lives where we're limiting God? I want you to ask him today, Lord, illumine my heart to show me anything that I'm putting up as an obstacle for what you can do in my life. What are the things that I've believed in my mind that may not be true about you, that you want to you ever hear the phrase, well, yeah, I know you have, blow my mind? All those little obstacles in your mind that are constraining the infinite limitations of Jesus. Infinite limitations is kind of a funny way to say it. Invite him to break those down. Invite him to tear down those walls that you've put up, whether you knew it or not, whether you did it on purpose or not. Maybe there's an influence in your life and you just kind of went along with a certain line of thought. But because of that, you're having a harder time opening enough to Jesus. These people aren't open. They're open about this much. And so Jesus can only give them this much. But what if we came to him like this? Right? What if we could figure out anything in our lives that's getting in the way of doing this? Let's bring that to him prayerfully today and ask him for conversion, expansion of our hearts in that way. Think of it this way as well. We can only give as much love as we're willing to receive. I think we all would like to be loving people, yes? We all are here because we want to follow Jesus. And in doing so, if we want to live a life like him, then we need to be ready to give much. But if we're only willing to let God do this much for me, then how can I go out and expect to be able to give like this? But if I come to Jesus wide open and say, Lord, I want to receive everything that you want to give me. Jesus, I surrender to you. Help me to put aside any ideas of mine that might be getting in your way. To give him full permission, to give him freedom to roam around on the interior of our hearts and say, I want to love you here. Our hearts are like echo chambers. And when our hearts get malformed by wrong thinking or by our sins or by our wounds, Jesus goes in there into the echo chamber and he goes, I love you. And what he expects to hear back is, I love you, I love you, I love you. Because we're sitting there and we're going, I'm loved, I'm loved, I'm loved. But what happens very often because of our wounds and because of our wrong thinking and because of the lies that we believe is Jesus is there in all areas of our life going, I love you. And what he's hearing back is, I'm not good enough. I'm too ugly. You don't really love me. You're just saying that. And Jesus is like, there must be something wrong with this echo chamber here. So the question for us is, will you let him in there to kind of rearrange your furniture? Right? Start to break down the things. Faith, first, is a gift. It's a gift. It's something that's divinely infused. So if you want more faith, if you want to believe in him more so that he can do more things for you, first I want to ask you also to, in your prayer today, ask him for the gift of faith. This one might seem obvious, but it's something that I think we need to do more and more and more and more. Almost every time I'm praying for someone, I'm praying for an increase in faith and hope and charity. When people bring things to me outside of Mass, Father, would you bless this? I'm always asking for an increase in faith and hope and charity. We can't get enough of that. We're never going to arrive to a place where we're done growing in faith. So ask for the gift of faith. Faith is also an act of putting our trust in someone. It's an act. It's a choice. Right? So there's also the place within us. It's our freedom. It's our will, that ability, that power to make a choice. Right? And so make a choice today. Jesus, I choose to trust you more. This is the part of my life where I haven't trusted you previously. Today, right now, in this moment, with the grace of God, I'm making a choice. Do something different. It says that Jesus went away from that town. He laid his hands on a couple of people who were sick. You can imagine the sick people were probably a little bit more desperate, and so they had a little bit more faith. They were willing to trust a little bit more, and they were healed. We don't have to be afraid of our weaknesses or our sicknesses. Jesus is powerful. Let's not strip him of that power. St. Paul in the second reading, he says that he was begging the Lord to deliver him from his own sins, these thorns in his flesh. And Jesus' response is, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, right? And my power is made perfect in your weakness. We don't have to be afraid of our weaknesses, brothers and sisters. We don't have to be afraid of that because God's love for us is so great. Right? Come to him with confidence, right? Knowing that your weakness, your sinfulness, your errors are not an obstacle for him unless we make it that, right? He doesn't condemn you. He says, go and sin no more. Right? So in your weakness, invite him into your weakness. In your desperation, show yourself to him and put your trust in him so he can heal us and do mighty works for us. Let's stand together now, profess our faith in our loving and merciful God. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us men and for our salvation, he came down from heaven, and by the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and became man. For our sake he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried, and rose again on the third day, in accordance with the Scriptures. He ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. I believe in the Holy